Hello and welcome to a new episode of Diehards and Glory Hunters. I'm your host, George Brown, and we've got another special episode for you today. We're not going to do the traditional format of me interviewing a fan about their team because in honour of the international break that's currently happening, we're going to talk all things England. And more specifically, we're going to look and perhaps predict ahead to next summer and the 2021 rescheduled 2020 European Championships. And essentially, what we're going to be doing today is picking our 23-man squad for those championships. And to help me do that, I've got two of my closest aides and confidants. I've got Mr. James Wilson. How are you doing, mate?
Hi, George. Yeah, really good. Pleasure to be back on the podcast.
Pleasure to have you, buddy. And I've got Fred Spencer. How are
I'm
you,
doing
mate?
great, mate. Thank you for having me on.
No worries at all. So to explain how the format's going to work, I've sort of set James and Freddie some homework and they've gone away and they've compiled their own 23-man squads. And we're going to sort of go through theirs one by one, player by player. And if they both have picked the same player, then he goes straight in. He's a certainty he's on the plane to, I would say to one specific country, but he's actually not going anywhere because England start, of course, their games at Wembley
He'll be on
next
the
summer.
coach to Wembley Stadium.
But he'll be on the coach to Wembley Stadium, exactly. And if there happens to be a disagreement, I mean, I've set no particular rules on how many defenders and midfielders and strikers they have to pick. It's totally up to them. I haven't set any limits on what formation they'd like to play if they thought about it in that way. So we may even be in a situation where it's whether we pick an extra defender or an extra midfielder. But when it comes to a deciding vote and they disagree, I will obviously, as the host of the podcast, have that deciding vote. And I've also given myself 3 wildcard picks. So I won't necessarily have to use them all. There's perhaps a chance that we happen to agree pretty much completely on the 23-man squad. But in the case that I think these two are being clowns and have picked the wrong people, I've given myself 3 chances to overrule them and pick a player that they haven't mentioned. So we'll kick off, and I think we'll start with goalkeepers, but I've got a feeling this may be the quickest and easiest section of the whole show, because in my mind anyway, there's 3 front runners for the squad, and so we'll start with James. Who have you got as your 3 keepers?
Yeah, I imagine Fred and yourself have chosen the same 3 as much as everyone else will for next Euros. I've gone for starting Dean Henderson, currently at Man United, and then just behind him, Pickford and Pope as the backup goalkeeper.
Fred, do you concur?
Yes, I do concur. Although I hate the fact that I have to put Pickford in there. I don't like him. I don't think he's a good keeper. I think, yes, he's got good distribution, but I can see him in the last games, or if we get far in the Euros, I can see him making that one mistake that gets us knocked out. So I'm not comfortable having him there.
Okay, well, it's interesting you say that then, because that was going to be my question. I think, off the top of my head, the only other ones that I could sort of come up with that are playing regularly in the Premier League that we haven't mentioned is Alex McCarthy and Aaron Ramsdale. And Heaton's still kicking around, but I don't think he'll get back in the team with Martinez at Villa. So I think he's probably out. But I think most people, as you say, will stick with those 3. And I'd be surprised if Gareth strayed from that as well. But the question, of course, is between those 3, who's actually going to be your number 1? So James has already said Dean Henderson. So do you want to just talk a bit about why you think he should be England's number 1?
Just look at how he performed for Sheffield United last year. He was arguably one of their best players, if not the best player. Completely, considering everyone thought Sheffield United were not going to do anywhere near as well as they did do last season. He's a standout goalkeeper, and he's more than a worthy opponent for that number 1 spot against Pickford. I know he's on probably going to be a lot of time on the bench this season at Man United, but I really do think if De Gea has another few periods of looking a bit uncertain, like he has done very recently, I do think Solskjaer or whoever is in charge at Man United at the time has a really interesting option on their hands as to when do they put in Dean Henderson, not if.
Okay, and Fred, do you think any differently, or do you agree with James?
So I've got starting with Pope, The reason why I've
Okay.
got that is because he is getting regular first-time football at the moment. And I think of all positions in football, you want to have a goalkeeper who is regularly starting. I think everywhere on the pitch, that's where if Henderson was starting regularly for Man United, and who knows, that might change this season, he would be my number one. But also, I think if he is going to be my number one as well, I would have wanted him to have already played in the international friendlies and in the previous international break for England, and I don't think he did. So for me, I'm sticking with Pope as my number one.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I do sort of agree with you, Fred, actually, in that I don't understand Henderson's move, if I'm on it, or well, not so much move, but choice of staying, because football's a short game. And yeah, obviously long term, he's going to replace De Gea. I get that. But who's to say it will be at any point this season? And if he's just playing cup games this season, well, then he's probably blown his chance to be number one goalkeeper at an international tournament. I just don't understand that. I think he was much better off having another season out on loan at Sheffield United, because then I think he probably would have ousted Pickford. But yeah, hey ho, it's too early to say at this stage. But I mean, this isn't really what we're picking. We're picking the squad and not the team. But I'm not going to sit on the fence. I would probably side with Fred, and I'd go with Pope, actually,
So
just because of that regular football.
You definitely wouldn't put Pickford in, George, as your starting keeper, number one.
I think Pickford gets unfair hate when it comes to England. I mean, God, Everton fans, they've got a right to perhaps question him. I think he makes too many mistakes. He makes too many mistakes. But someone said it, I can't remember, pundit or someone said it the other day. He's never actually made a mistake for England. He's never let England down. And that's fair. And I think, I know that obviously your club form massively matters to being picked for international level, but also how you perform when you're wearing the national shirt, that should have a bearing as well. Having said all of that, I hate to sort of boost Freddie's ego, but I liked what he said earlier. I think when it comes down to the latter stages of the tournament, I think you want someone who won't make a mistake, and I think Pope is less likely to make a mistake than Pickford. Hence, I'll go with Nick Pope.
Yeah. Okay.
However, up for debate, and we don't have to pick a certain starting 11 today. We're just picking the squad. Okay, so keepers, relatively easy, relatively simple. We're 3 for 3. Defenders, I think this is possibly the category which is the hardest to pick, because there are just so many. Like, I think when I was researching it, you can pick up, there's about 20 that could realistically go.
Half of them are right backs.
And half of them are right backs, exactly. But okay, then, beautifully timed, James. We'll start with right back. My first question then is, how many have you picked?
Yeah.
And who are they?
In terms of the amount of defenders I have in total, I've got 8. And at my starting right back position, it has to be Trent for me. There is a couple others in there that, or one other that's competing for that spot. But for right back, considering his passing and distribution, okay, there's an argument that he isn't as good defensively. I think what else he offers on the pitch, including pace and passing, I think he's my number one.
Okay, and who else have you got, if you've picked a backup?
So in the right back position, who else I've got is Wan-Bissaka. He's the only other right back
Really?
I've got. Yeah, for a more defensive. I think if we're coming up against a team and we know we're going to have to defend, I think I'd want Wan-Bissaka over anyone else for the defensive, if we're playing defensively. Yeah.
And they're the only 2 right-sided options that you've got?
Yes. Yeah, the rest are actually centre-backs. But yeah, we'll get onto that.
We'll get onto that. So, Fred, how many right-backs have you picked, and who are they?
I have picked 2 right-backs. I think the obvious one to start with is Trent.
Yeah, no arguments
and
there.
I've gone for Kyle Walker as my second choice. I think his experience is really needed, and it's one thing that I thought of when I was writing up my team. especially in the midfield, apart from one player who we'll come to later. I feel like England has a very young squad, and I think in every position we need a backup with a lot of experience, because you can only play so many kids, as the old proverb goes. That was proven wrong. But so also I think Walker too brings a directness to England that might be necessary when we're in a scrappy game, and Trent could become sort of lost out wide as well. So that's why I've gone for Walker. And also it looks like Southgate might be playing three centre backs. And we see however well or however bad he played in that position, Walker is capable of playing as the right centre back should injuries come up. So he's more versatile as well, in my opinion.
Yes, very interesting. Now, that was what I was going to say. It's probably worth mentioning this early, actually. What formation? I know that the game is not to pick a starting 11, but I know you both have done that. So have you started with a 4, or are you playing a 5?
I've started with a 4.
And James?
Same here, yeah. 4 at the back.
Okay. So that's interesting. So your choices, even though what Fred said is absolutely true, and I think that's definitely a tick in Walker's column, the fact that he could also play right centre-back, you're both playing with a 4. Okay, I'm really tempted to use my wild card here.
Really?
And overall, you both, because I'll be honest, Walker and Wan-Bissaka were not the right back I would have picked at all. In fact, I could have picked 2 others, and I wouldn't have picked those 2. So I may hold off until I hear who else you've got in defence. But I'm not convinced. So I'm not willing to put either of. Obviously, Trent straight in, no argument there whatsoever. But I'm not willing to put Walker or Wan-Bissaka in just yet. But one of them may get in, depending on who else you've got. So we'll move to centre backs then. We'll go to Freddie this time. How many have you got?
So I put in 4 centre backs. The pairing that has been playing for England very often in recent times, Maguire and Gomez. Of course, I've put in Connor Cody because I think on the ball, and in terms of when we play a team, let's say, that are going to press us very high, I think he's a very good option to have in terms of releasing Sterling and Sancho on the counter. I can see that working well potentially. And the last option is Tarkowski.
Okay, right. So that's, I would say, perhaps our first. It's not controversial. Let's not forget he's already got an England cap, Tarkowski. But why have you gone for him?
It's always something I've thought about when the teams have been selected, and I think he's a one player where there's never been a reason not to select him. He's just been unlucky, and he hasn't been given his opportunity. And you think of where Maguire was a few years back with Leicester when he got into the England squad, and he started so well. And I think having a player there with the hunger and the desire, which Tarkowski will bring, and I think he's a bit of a misunderstood player because he plays for Burnley. I think
How so?
I'm not saying he's Pirlo, but I don't think he's as bad on the ball as people would make out. And defensively, again, as we said earlier, my reason for putting Pope in instead of Pickford, I think he's less likely to make a defensive mistake in the latter stages of the tournament than Harry Maguire, even though I would start with Harry Maguire. But that's my point. So that's why Tarkowski gets in for me.
Okay, very interesting. We'll come back to that. I've got a feeling that certainly 2 will match the same, but James, you may prove me wrong. So who have you got as your 4?
Yeah, so I have 4 centre-backs as well. Much like Fred's, I've got Maguire and Gomez to probably start, which is kind of ironic considering last weekend they shipped 13 goals between them at the back for their respective clubs. But I think for England, I mean, they're going to be starting for me. I didn't think you'd pick him, but I've also got Connor Cody as well at the back. Yeah, I really like him. I do really like him. He's a leader at the back, and well, Fred's already spoke about him, but yeah, I do fancy him for a somewhat surprise pick, I think. And my other final centre back is not Tarkowski, it's actual Michael Keane. That's the guy I've gone for Everton. Now he's got, I think,
Okay.
11 appearances for England already, compared to, I'm not too sure how many Tarkowski has, but I think it would be more experience in the international stage for Michael Keane. Bear in mind, he wouldn't be my starting pick, but as, you know, in case of injuries or whatever, if we're playing a three at the back, you know, I think Michael Keane could do a very good replacement should anyone get injured or we need him as a sub, for example.
Okay, very interesting. Do you know what? I mean, before we started recording, you both said that you'd have very, very similar teams and that we'd all pick the same. I can tell you, we really don't, because I agree with you on 3. So 3 go straight in. I mean, obviously, you've both agreed on Maguire, you've both agreed on Gomez, and you've both agreed on Cody. And even though James said it was a controversial pick, and maybe it is, I also would pick Cody. I'm a big fan of his as well. And I think the key thing with Cody is that if you are going to play a 5 at the back, and for me, and we'll probably talk about this, throughout picking the squad, the key has got to be adaptability. I hate the idea that we'll pick one way of playing, a team set up in a certain formation, 4-3-3 or whatever, and we'll just never stray from that, regardless of who we play against. I think against weaker opposition in the group stages, sure, 4-3-3 is probably the best way to get the most attacking players on the pitch. But when we come up against a team that's frankly better than us, for example, Belgium, I'd be interested to see how Southgate sets up in just under an hour's time. But it wouldn't surprise me at all that if he picked 5 today, I do think the 5 at the back is a really, really good option. I like that formation. I think it gives you a little bit of extra defensive solidity, which England desperately need at times. And obviously, Cody is used to playing that week in, week out as that dominant middle centre half. So, yeah, really like the fact that you've both picked him. I feel more strongly about this, I think, than I do about the right back, so I may have to just pick between the 2 you've chosen, but I'm not going to pick Tarkowski. I like Fred's argument, and I have an interesting fact about Tarkowski, actually, which is that he is definitely overrated because I wish I knew off the top of my head, can't remember the organisation, but it's one of the many statistical websites that are obsessed with football stat, and they picked a statistical team of the season for last year in terms of passing stats, tackling stats, clean sheets, all of that sort of stuff, goals, etc. And it, as it wouldn't surprise you, a lot of world stars got in, but I think alongside Virgil van Dijk was James Tarkowski. So statistically, he's actually he matches up against some of the very, very best. So I do think Fred's got an argument there. However, I think he's untested at the very highest level, and that's why I wouldn't go for him. And the person I'd go for, and so I'm going to use a wild card here, and I'm going to go for Tyrone Mings instead of Michael Keane and instead of Tarkowski. And the key word there, and the reason I've picked him, one reason, he's left-footed. Yeah. And this is so underrated as an important facet, especially in defending. You've got to have a left-footed option. You have to. If you play 2 right-footed centre-halves, it's been analysed multiple times. You can get into problems, especially when teams press. And that's often where mistakes come from, when teams press players that are playing on their weaker foot because they're just less confident and hence give the ball away more. And the other reason I picked Tyrone Mings is that if you were to switch to a 3-back, if you're going to play in one of the wide centre-back positions, he has got experience playing as a fullback, so would be more comfortable defending in those wide areas than a Michael Keane or a James Tarkowski. So, yeah, it's a close one. How do you guys feel about that I've just picked Tyrone Mings?
No, I mean, to be fair, the main argument there is because of his left foot, to be honest. Which I agree with.
That is the argument. Yeah.
If he wasn't, then I probably wouldn't pick him. But whilst that's absolutely fine, you can pick Mings. I don't really disagree at all. But I'm surprised that no one's even mentioned someone that has possibly forgotten about now, I suppose, especially in the England stage, is John Stones. So no one's really picked him, which was surprising.
No,
I
I
thought one of you
I
would have
think
picked
that's
him. But I mean,
Didn't even come into my
I
mind.
can understand why, because I mean, if Pep doesn't even pick him every week for Man City and is looking to get rid of him, I can understand that. But yeah, it's just so strange how he's gone from one of our first centre backs to be picked to sort of
Do you know
obscurity.
what, James? This is a point that I also really like that you've just raised. And I think when we come to picks, especially in the midfield next, I think there's a problem in England for years now. It feels like we keep bigging up young talent. And after a few years, they just end up nowhere. And sometimes it's the players who've had to grind in the lower leagues for a few years that end up being the best options, which will justify one of my midfield picks later. So we'll come to that in a bit.
I'm looking forward to that. Okay, but for the basis of going through the team, we have our 4 centre-backs confirmed, and they are Harry Maguire, Joe Gomez, Connor Cody, and Tyrone Mings. So moving to left-back, back to you, James. Who have you got as your... I'm assuming, given that there's 2 left, you've picked 2 left-backs?
Yes, yeah, I have. Well, the first one is, again, pretty obvious. It's Ben Chilwell.
Yep.
I think he's only played once for Chelsea, or twice, but he's had a great start for them. And yeah, he's my first pick for left back all day long. It's my second pick where I honestly spent so much time trying to think who do I pick here, because whilst we have an abundance of right back options, on the left side we're actually a bit weak in that position, in my opinion. If it's not Chilwell, and whilst I've had a look at the options available, I've actually gone for probably a surprising pick. It's Brandon Williams for Manchester United.
You're joking.
Yeah, I don't. Who else would you pick? I'm not picking Danny Rose. I'm not picking Luke Shaw. I'd rather take Brandon Williams to give him a good experience and hope that Chilwell doesn't get injured.
Okay, right. I'm really hoping Fred hasn't picked Brandon Williams. Fred, who
so
have you
of course
picked?
The obvious is Chilwell, and now I'm tempted to make a change since you've brought in Mings, and of course he is capable of playing left back, to bring in another midfield player.
That's a good point.
But given the absurdity that I've just heard from James, I'm not going to do that.
Right, we're like a gamble.
And so I'm going to go for Bukayo Saka.
Okay. Very interesting. Again, I disagree. Now I'm thinking I've got to time these wild cards because God knows who you two are picking further forward.
I expect you to not like my decision, but I just...
But I would rather take my pick in midfield as well.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Brandon Williams, don't get me wrong. I don't want to slag him off. He's done great, but I'm not convinced he's the option at left back. I mean, he's not even left-footed.
Who else do you put there? Who else are you going to take then, George? If it's not wildcarding, just say who you'd rather have.
Well, I have to say, I when looking through and researching all of the options, I think left back is England's weakest position by far in terms of strength and depth, because Chilwell is really the only option. I mean, he'll be the first, if he's not injured, and let's hope he's not injured, he'll be the first name on the team sheet, I would think, because there's just no one else that could regularly compete, especially in a 4. In fairness, I like Saka. I really like Saka as a player, and I love the fact he's adaptable, but I don't think he would play in a 4. I think he'd be a left wing back.
Left wing back.
So I don't think I can pick him either. So
why don't we leave this and decide later in the teams if we go 7 defenders and 7 midfielders, or 8 defenders, 6 midfielders, or whatever, so we can leave the question mark.
Yeah. what I'm going to do, though, there is one player who I'm going to put in. So I'm going to use this wild card because you've had two opportunities to mention him, and clearly you haven't. So I'm afraid he's got to be in my team, and it's for one reason again. So I'm going to pick Kieran Trippier.
Yeah,
and I'm going to pick him, and as I said, and it's purely for set piece delivery. And we saw in the World Cup in 2018, England scored like 70% of their goals from set pieces. It's such a weapon we have. And for some reason, it's something that we've always done better than other nations. I don't know why. Maybe our set piece coaching is slightly better. But ever since I've watched England, we've always scored goals from set pieces at major tournaments. And Trippier's set piece delivery is phenomenal. It's consistently brilliant. He put that when Cody scored the other night against Wales, he put in an absolute beauty of a cross then. And the other thing with Trippier, which is why it's relevant to now, is that he can play left back. I know I've just said you can't pick Brandon Williams because he's right-footed and Trippier's right-footed, but Trippier is more experienced. So, I mean, I'd pick him as my second choice right back, but also you do have the option that you could play him at a pinch, certainly left wing back, maybe left back in terms of crisis. So, yeah, Ben Chilwell's definitely in and Kieran Trippier's definitely in. And there is still one space available to make up 8 defenders.
Who do we have at the
7
moment,
as it stands.
then?
So as it stands, we've got Trent Alexander-Arnold. We've got the 4 centre-halves of Maguire, Gomez, Cody and Mings. We've got Ben Chilwell and we've got Kieran Trippier. So there is another spot there. But we'll come back to it because I'm not sure. I'm not sure, honestly, as it stands.
I love that, George. For all the stick you gave me for my decision on Brandon Williams, you then choose a 30-year-old right back who plays in Spain. Who's right-footed.
To be clear, I'm not picking him as the second.
I love your left back option.
I'm not picking him as the second. I'm not picking him as the second choice left back. I'm picking him as the second choice right back.
Okay.
But you two ignored him for that position as well, so I had to get him in somewhere. And he's a better pick than Brandon Williams. I'm not having a debate about that. Anyway, we shall move into midfield. Freddie, you can go first. Start with the, in terms of order, just start with the players that you deem.
Okay, so to start with, I have Declan Rice, who starts for me. I'm going to go to the ones that are locked in for me first. I'm going to change it a bit. For me, Jordan Henderson, of course, is locked in.
Yeah.
Jack Grealish for me as well is someone who I've definitely locked into my team. And I think he should get start given, and I'll give that argument later because he's the pick that I was saying when James raised the point about defenders. Here is where it becomes a bit messy. At the moment, I've got Calvin Phillips in because I think he's a better pick than Eric Dyer as a backup defensive midfielder. I've put in Foden.
Okay, right. So just to be clear, that's
I've
5
put in
now.
James Maddison, and I've put in Harry Winks.
Okay.
Yeah, those are my 7.
So they're your 7. Okay. Thank you, Fred. James, let's go through yours. So we'll just tick off the ones that you've both picked that go straight in. So when you're ready,
I'll make this nice and simple. Fred, I've got basically the same midfield as you, bar 1.
Okay, brilliant. Who do you have the same?
Yeah, well, I've got Rice starting, of course, and then in no particular order, just naming the squad. So Rice, Grealish, Foden, Henderson, Phillips, Maddison, and instead of Winks, I've got Mason Mount. And in terms of defensively, I agree with Fred. I don't particularly rate Dyer that much, but he even said himself he's more comfortable at the centre-back position, and he's not playing centre-back in this England side, for me anyway. So the only difference there being Mason Mount instead of Harry Winks.
Okay, great. Right, well, we'll just go through those one more time, the ones that are absolutely confirmed. And I'm pleased to say that I agree with all of those. So that's Declan Rice, Jordan Henderson, Calvin Phillips, We've gone for 3 attacking options, which I like, in Phil Foden, James Maddison, and Jack Grealish. And the one that you differentiate on is Harry Winks or Mason Mount. And the first time I actually have to decide and not overrule you both, because I think they're both reasonable picks. I think you could argue either way, but it will surprise absolutely no one. I'm going on the side of Mason Mount. I just think you've got enough cover with Rice, Henderson and Phillips. I don't think you need Winks. Don't have a problem with Harry Winks, like him as a player. I just think if you're picking those 3, no need. And I think Mount is much more of an option going forward. So, yeah, I will side with James and I'll pick Mason Mount as the 7th pick.
Absolutely. So my reasoning behind this, and I know I'm not going to convince you otherwise, but I hope the viewers of this channel will hear my reasoning and realise how much nepotism is going on here. But,
okay, well, you've got to make a strong case for yourself.
Okay,
here we go.
For me, Jordan Henderson and Declan Rice start. If one of them is injured, Calvin Phillips jumps in, and suddenly you're in a position where you don't have a backup in those positions. By putting Mount in, as in if Calvin Phillips gets in, then suddenly, let's say it's 90th minute, you can't take him out the team in the 80th minute when you need to rotate him if he's tired or whatever. I think it's more sensible to put in Winks just in terms of squad depth, because suddenly if you have Mount in there, realistically you've got Mount, Maddison, Grealish and Foden fighting for one spot as the attacking midfielder.
Fred, it's a really, really good point. And do you know what? I've sort of rolled you into a trap here, because I knew that would be your argument. But here's exactly why I don't think that's valid. Because I've obviously watched Mason Mount week in, week out. He's hugely misunderstood as a footballer. And he's also sort of become a bit of a joke. And I have to admit, I laugh at the jokes. The whole, he's Frank Lampard's son. He only gets picked because Frank watches him practice free kicks and all that stuff. Yeah, it's quite funny, really. And he's unfairly compared to Maddison and Grealish in particular, who, by the way, are much more creative and have much better final product than Mason Mount. I'm a Chelsea fan, but that is true. There was an example the other week when we were playing Spurs in the Cup. He went through, I think he has Werner running off him. It was a simple pass, but he didn't make it because that's not his game. If that's Grealish or Maddison, they slip him in, it's a goal. And that's why I think there's an argument that both Grealish and Maddison and even Foden should probably start ahead of Mount. The difference is where Mason Mount's qualities lie in everything else. So he's a much better presser, he's a much better tackler, he's a much better link man than those 3 players, and can therefore play deeper than those 3 players. So he may not be like for Winks, but I still think if at a push, you could play him and one other. So, for example, if you had a midfield of Rice, Mount, Maddison, that would work absolutely fine in my book.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't say James Ward-Prowse, not only because of what we said beforehand, but also he's just as good defensively, or more of a centre mid. And also,
do you know what, James? That was my debate. When I picked my team, I was going between Winks and James Ward-Prowse. Mount didn't really give much consideration to be honest. And so I would be happy with either of them ahead of Mount, but we know that because George here loves him, he's probably his cousin. He's getting in, so it's fine. It's fine. I can concede defeat for this one because I'm going to have the laugh when it comes to the World Cup, the Euros. Sorry, and Mount misses a sitter, or we have very little depth because someone gets injured. Almost hope it happens now.
Okay, well, we'll stop the Great Mason Mount debate now, and we'll move on.
Wonderful hypotheticals being thrown around here, so we'll
Yeah.
move on.
So, has anyone got another midfielder, or is that all of them? You
Seven,
picked
yeah.
seven.
7, yeah.
Okay, so you've gone quite top heavy then. There must be quite a lot of forwards. So with no further ado, let's get to those. I mean, you don't even need to say it. I'm assuming, and if either of you have not picked these 4, then well, you're wrong. But I'm guessing Kane, Sterling, Sancho, and Rashford are all in. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, just in the interest of time, we don't really need to go over those. Who would you start, by the way, as the 3? I guess that's more of the question.
Who are you asking, George?
James, you can answer
it. Yeah. So if we're starting, for me, I'm the formation, just to make it clear, is the 4-3-3 that we're playing with Rice, Henderson, and an attacking player as Cam. And now up top, I'm playing Sterling left, Kane in the middle as the central striker, and Sancho on the right.
So
and
yes,
Fred,
that's the original thing that I went for, but there's also an alternative that I was toying with, and it's a bit audacious. But I was thinking,
oh God, here we go.
4-1-2-1-2. 4-4-2, but like a diamond formation in the middle. And actually, so Kane, given how he's played this season for Spurs against better opposition, could drop back into attacking midfield with Calvert-Lewin up top alongside Sterling and Sancho.
Okay. I don't really see how you fit that into that formation.
Yeah, that's
but interesting.
But that's
interesting.
why I was thinking of putting Winks in, because then, of course, you'd need another defensive midfielder in the squad.
Okay. All right. Well, you've mentioned him now. So you've obviously got Dominic Calvert-Lewin. James, do you have Dominic Calvert-Lewin?
I actually do, yeah. I thought that was going to be another Brandon Williams moment where George and Fred sort of go, what are you doing? But no, I also have him, Calvert-Lewin. He's on great form, isn't he? You can't not pick him at the minute.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think he's, from a personal point of view, he's probably been one of the big surprises to me. He's proved me wrong. I never thought he would get to the level that he has, but you can't not pick him. Absolutely right. And in fairness to Fred, we've given you some stick for your 4-2-4 formation that you've just picked. But I think the thought process is not bad, actually. And the reason I would take Calvert-Lewin is because I think he's possibly the best striker in terms of a partner for Kane. So if you did need a goal, I think he offers something different to play alongside Kane. So I do think there was some sound thinking, though I'm not sure your tactical formation work was absolutely spot on. Okay, so what's that? That's 5.
Yeah.
Who else have you got? Freddie, you say
Danny Ings.
Who else you've got then?
As my final forward.
Okay, and James?
Well, I mean, considering I had 8 defenders initially, so technically my 5 has already been said to make up the 23-man squad. But
well, then you're missing a player then.
No, it's because Wan-Bissaka and we didn't choose the right back, I don't think. Either way, I'll choose another attacker because it's fun. Why not? But the guy who unfortunately missed out was Danny Ings as well. And I'm not just copying Fred because I think he's sort of been underrated since he's left Liverpool. He's obviously been hindered with injuries and such, but he scored, I think, nearly 20 goals last season. He's a clinical striker, and he's just, a great positioning. And I'd love him to be in the squad if I have the space. Of course, he's there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, James. I've just done the counting in my head. There is no space for Danny Ings.
Yeah.
you can't get in.
Hence why it was a sad goodbye, but I left him on the Victoria coach platform.
He'd be first reserve, wouldn't he, Danny Ings? I think
cool.
That's fair to say. He'd be first reserve. Great player, underrated probably. But for the reasons we've discussed with Calvert-Lewin, I think you want difference coming off the bench, don't you? And I think he offers something different to Kane. Okay, so that leaves us one player, which I think is perfect, actually, because now it means we can put it in where we think we need someone. So I'll go through who we've got so far. The three keepers are Pickford, Pope, and Henderson. The defenders, and we've only picked 7 as it stands, are Trent Alexander-Arnold, Maguire, Gomez, Cody, and Mings, Chilwell, and then, because of my mad wild card, Kieran Trippier. In midfield, we've got Rice, Henderson, and Phillips as what you would consider perhaps more holding players. And then we've gone quite attacking. There's definitely room for creativity in our teams. We've got Foden, Maddison, Grealish, and, of course, the gem that is Mason Mount. And then up front, we've got 5 in that we've got Kane, Sancho, Sterling, Rashford, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So, I mean, to be fair, I've sort of changed the process for you boys now, because obviously we've been through the teams that you've picked. But now that you've seen the 22-man squad, is there a player that you'd like to throw in any position? And I'll give you both one player to champion. James, do you want to go first?
What, in terms of another player I'd like to add, for example?
Yeah, it can be a defender, it can be a midfielder. If there's one player that you'd like to put in the team that isn't currently in the squad, who is it and why?
Yeah. Well, it's between 2. One's already been mentioned. I'll stay with the one that I'm going to throw in. It's Saka, because I'm looking at the team, considering the amount of centre backs we have. If we play 5 at the back, and if we can have Walker playing right centre back, for example, then I'd like to have Saka as a left wing back as well, especially we're playing 5 at the back. Possibly not the strongest. Again, it's just because we're so weak defensively on that side. But the other guy I was toying to consider was Greenwood, but I just think he's so young. He's still got a lot to prove. He could do really well this season, though, and this time next year he could be an absolute guarantee for that squad. But it sort of remains to see how the season goes, especially.
Yeah, definitely worth an honourable mention, though.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought him up, because you're right, we hadn't mentioned him, and he's did brilliantly last season. Still young, probably just too young, I would think. It may come a year too early for him. And he's unlucky just because there's one, going forward, we've actually got lots of options. So it's probably unlucky there. Fred, I mean, if you like, you can throw in a Harry Winks or James Ward-Prowse. Now you've seen the team that we've picked. Is there anyone that you want to mention?
Winks or James Ward-Prowse. That's what I'm going to do, because I think that's the position where we need it. When I look at the squad, I think that's sort of more not holding midfielder, but sort of not an attacking midfielder role is where we need another player. And so I think it has to be, for me, either Winks or James Ward-Prowse coming in. And I'm divided evenly between the two. I think that's a toss-up.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, who would you throw?
I'm not sure what to do here. What I'm going to say, first of all, is I'm just going to throw out some names that haven't been mentioned again. I don't think, genuinely, there's not one player that you've not mentioned that I think should definitely be in. I think we've covered the ones that I really think should start or should be in the squad. But just players like Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Ross Barkley and Callum Hudson-Odoi. At the back, you've got some real wild cards like Ben White of Brighton, maybe Lewis Dunk, Fikayo Tomori even, which are all in the category of hugely unlikely. But I guess if they had the season of their lives, could potentially break into the squad. Ainsley Maitland-Niles hasn't been mentioned, and obviously he's in the squad at the moment and can play left wing back. That's another option. I don't know what to do. I think, and it wasn't in my initial thinking, but I think I'm going to use my final vote and go with Bukayo Saka. Yeah, just because he's a bit of a utility man.
Yeah, he can also play left mid or even left wing at times as well.
Yeah. I think in a squad you need some players that are going to be adaptable, and he can play in a number of positions. And I really like him, to be honest. I just think he's got a really good attitude. Plus, I think it's always a good thing to bring some youth to tournaments to give them experience. I think he'd possibly be the only player we were picking who's under 20. I think Foden just turned 20, so he'd be the second youngest. So yeah, he'd be the only teenager that we're bringing. So yeah, it's close, but I think I'm going to go with Bukayo Saka. I disagree with Fred. I think we've got enough in midfield. So yeah, that's it.
Okay.
There you go. That's the sort of decisiveness you want from an England manager. I'm going to go with Bukayo Saka.
Yeah. I'm surprised,
Okay.
I'm surprised there's no mention of little Tariq Lamptey in there as well, George. Remember you were...
That's a very good point, James. Yeah, worth a shout again. I think, again, his problem is that we've happened to have 10 very good right-backs in this country. So he's probably just a bit unlucky.
Left-back, he would be straight into my team.
Love Tariq Lamptey.
No, there's no way he's getting in over Kieran Trippier at left back.
To be clear, especially now I've picked Saka, Trippier is the backup right back.
What about Ryan
right
Fredericks?
back?
I'm joking with that one. Oh, he's the right back as well, isn't he?
Okay. Now we're going a bit too left field.
All right. Okay. Well, there we go. That is our full England squad. It wasn't the task, but I'm interested to know. I'm not even going to try and correct you. I'm just interested if you could both name your starting 11 for the first game of Euro 2021 to finish. We'll start with you, James.
Yeah. So bear with me a second. Let me just get it up. So in goal, we've got Dean Henderson. I have to sit with my guns there. In defence, it's Trent, Maguire, Cody, and Chilwell. In midfield, as the two sort of holding midfielders, is Rice and Henderson, with Grealish as the centre attacking. And up front, as I've already mentioned, it's Sterling, Kane, and Sancho as my starting 11.
It is.
And Freddie, is it any different?
I have Gomez in at centre back. That's the only difference. Instead of Cody,
over Cody,
I've got Gomez. So mine's Chilwell, Maguire, Gomez, Trent. Oh, I've also got Pope in goal. Declan Rice holding, Jordan Henderson, Jack Grealish attacking midfielder, Harry Kane, Sancho, Raheem Sterling.
Right, well, there we go. We have a conclusive answer to all of England's problems. Gareth, if you're stuck, listen to the podcast. We've got you covered.
If they need some backroom staff, next
yeah, absolutely. I think. Well, I mean, Brandon Williams maybe getting a surprise looking. It sounds like.
Forward to, okay, he's one for the future. You've got to give him his opportunities. Lesson.
Oh, brilliant. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks both of you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for the listeners, I'm hoping to return to the normal format of the podcast, but obviously that relies on fans getting in touch. So if you're listening, share it, or if you know anyone that might want to talk about their team, let me know. But we are going to keep going forward with these special episodes because I really enjoy them, and I hope you guys do as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll have more content, more consistent content, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon.
Thank you, George.
Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, George.